And as I alluded to earlier, it is hard for many diagnoses. The neurocognitive one is an example, but it is hard to complete a full evaluation unless you sit down with the client. But that is not true for some conditions, and it is particularly not true for the diagnosis of clinical psychopathy, which rests on information about their life, not what they might say or do in an interview.
Okay. Related to this, you talked earlier about how the term psychopath or psychopathy is used sort of in common parlance, like non-academic, to mean certain things. People see, depictions of this in TV and movies, which
Right.
I've heard is not always accurate, actually. So, if you believe that he has passed that bar, what should people know to understand the implications of that for a politician, for a president?
Yeah, well, let me just say that when the assessment process for this condition was developed in the late 1970s, it became kind of the gold standard for research. And subsequently, there have been over 80,000 studies using this assessment process. So someone that crosses that threshold, like Donald Trump, we now have a great deal of data. There's a lot we can say about him and a lot we can say with authority. And I'm afraid to report the implications are kind of ominous for someone with that condition. There are many things to say. Probably the most fundamental finding is that people who have this condition, through some data, significant statistical data reduction techniques, we've kind of boiled down the condition. People that have this condition are ruled by three sets of traits. And those three are impulsivity. The psychopath you should think of impulsivity in a psychopath as like ADD on steroids. They have basically no capacity to focus on anything beyond their immediate self-interest. They're just tethered to what's in it for me and how can I win the moment. Their ability to handle anything more thorny and complex is just not available to them. The disastrous response to COVID is, probably the most tragic example of that. And we now know from reporting there was never even a plan of a plan. It was totally beyond Trump. So impulsivity is a hardwired, lifelong characteristic of psychopaths. Which obviously is an extreme vulnerability for someone in the Oval Office. The second trait is probably the one we associate most closely with psychopaths, which is remorselessness. Psychopaths are undaunted by punishment. They have no moral fear of any neglectful or deceitful or divisive behavior. And we now know that that's linked to some brain abnormalities that are probably inherited, actually. And the brain abnormalities mean that the clinical psychopath, someone who meets the diagnostic criteria, just doesn't have the capacity, like 99+% of us, to experience the emotions of guilt, shame, and to a large extent, fear. They just don't process those emotions. And so while those emotions can be painful, they're humanizing emotions. They're the emotions that enable us to consider what effects our actions might have on others and to balance our more selfish impulses with deeper aims. The psychopath just doesn't have that emotional infrastructure. And that, of course, is quite dangerous. You mentioned the fictional characters. I think there's no question that Hannibal Lecter was meant to portray a psychopath. He was referred to that. And I think he actually did a good job of portraying that quality, the remorselessness quality. And that kind of captures the brain abnormality and the inability to experience guilt, fear, and shame. A psychopath is not going to be impacted by actions that might have a negative impact on others. Children in cages, overflowing morgues, again being the tragic examples from the from his first administration.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask you.
Just to finish, I said 3. And the third one is this drive to dominate. The psychopath, again, probably because of brain abnormalities, just doesn't have the capacity to empathize or care deeply about another. But they're not detached. They're very engaged by life, and the engagement is all in this win at all costs. I must dominate the other person. So that's the third quality. And what we've learned is the psychopath is really kind of a puppet on the strings of those 3 hardwired core traits.